Yeah, it's a TV or is it Johnny
All right, well, everybody go ahead and mute, and Dennis is going to go ahead and start presenting.
All right, good. Well, I see that you're recording. So good evening or afternoon or morning to everybody wherever you're located. And thank you for inviting me to make this presentation this evening. I think it's going to be a little different from the usual. I'm beginning tonight with some of my ancient personal history of how I got where I am today. And I hope you find it entertaining. But the reason I think it's worth a little more time than the usual bio is because I think it's unlikely that most developers became experts in FileMaker as their first career. It's certainly not something that we learned in college, although I do think there's a place for it in today's higher education curriculum. And I've even proposed ideas to Claris to accomplish that. The point is that whatever you did before you focused on FileMaker development, you acquired some other skills and experience that you surely brought to your FileMaker career. And in my case, there are three things that I can point to. First, my graphic design and desktop publishing work with Adobe and Quark software contributes to the user interfaces that I create. Second, working and consulting with a wide variety of professions and industries helps me to propose solutions to prospective clients that solve problems and improve productivity. And third, as the owner of my own business for 50 years now, I know what it's like to be on the other side of the business relationship, to evaluate the ROI of ideas and proposals for FileMaker apps. And that's what I mean by looking at apps from both sides now. All in all, I think of a developer's resume as something like a recipe for a delicious soup or casserole, because it can have dozens of ingredients that come all together to give it its unique flavor. So after my introduction about my career journey before Claris, which I think is going to run about 20 minutes, I'll run you through a series of FileMaker specifics, not necessarily best practices, but actually my practices. And I expect that some of you are already familiar with some of these, but if you're somebody who's just beginning your FileMaker career and you're watching this recording, I hope that these are helpful to you. And I've left time for discussion, but please go ahead and interrupt me anytime if you've got a question or a comment about what I'm talking about. My career has been a long and winding road with homes in 6 states and earning a living in several industries and professions. I began by manufacturing ballpoint pens for advertising with volunteer service on regional and national trade associations where I lectured, wrote magazine articles, and chaired task forces on professional certification and graphic arts readiness. I chaired a zoning board in my hometown in New Jersey and served on the Plan Commission when I lived in Dallas for 2 years. I handled sales and desktop publishing for 2 calendar companies during a period of my non-competition after selling my pen business. And I created an outsourced graphics studio in California to convert fax images to vector illustrations for just-in-time delivery or pre-press materials to printers and promotional product suppliers, the kind that you've probably seen on the 4imprint ads on television. All of that becoming an independent and certified FileMaker developer. I missed Tony's presentation in May, but I watched the recording about a month ago and found myself thinking that I had something I could add to or comment about many of the topics that were discussed. Not to disagree with them, but if we were sitting together in a conference session, I might have raised my hand to contribute something. Last month, I enjoyed Alexis's talk about aesthetics, and I've always found her conference sessions to be really favorites of mine. And I'm also giving a shout out to Heather Winkle, who came to Claris from Adobe about a decade ago, and her contribution to what was then the new FMP 12 format was revolutionary, a real turning point in my career as a developer, because it really opened the door to app design in a radically new and, I think, a better way. Way back when, my parents had me tested at NYU for vocational aptitude when I was in high school. I found this report in my mother's files after she died in 2000. It surprised me to see that my lowest score was for the very thing I did for 2 decades, and my highest scores were for Chamber of Commerce executive and computer programmer. Go figure. Before my freshman year in college, maybe because of that computer programmer score, a friend of the family gave me a summer job in the computer department of his company in New Jersey. They used the 80-column punch cards that were state-of-the-art in 1968. Every order of their food products consisted of a deck of those cards, and my job was to run the sorter. It always reminds me of the comedy movie, what's it called, 9 to 5, when Jane Fonda was overwhelmed by it wasn't a sorter, it was a collator that was attached to a Xerox copier and seemed to come alive, made for a great comedy scene. I was enrolled at Tufts in Boston from 1968 to 72. I began in a 5-year program for dual degrees in engineering and arts, but I quickly transferred out of the engineering program. My major became political science because it was a very turbulent political time with the Vietnam War and Kent State and campus drug busts. In fact, I remember that the first student protest I ever saw in my freshman year was after they announced a 22% tuition increase, when the tuition went from $1,875 to $2,300 per year. Today, it's only 28 times what it was way back then. My fraternity became involved with the March of Dimes, and 2 of us leaders were appointed young adult co-chairs for Massachusetts. You might recognize the celebrity who was sitting on our hands from the TV show Family Affair. We like to think that we invented the March of Dimes Walkathon, which became a regular event after the success of our fundraisers. The first time we did it, it was a 5-mile parade from the Tufts campus to the Boston Common, selling balloons for $1 along Mass Ave and collecting a surprising amount of cash. In the fall of 1970, I was a transfer student on World Campus Afloat, which is now called Semester at Sea. If any of you know any high school seniors or college-age students, I strongly recommend this program for 1 or 2 transfer semesters. In my case, my voyage visited Western Europe, Mediterranean, Western Africa, South and Central America, and Mexico. Back at Tufts, students used to make these 6-foot-long printouts in the computer lab, and they taped them to their dorm room doors. Snoopy was one of the characters I remember seeing. Another one was made from the famous Raquel Welch photo from 1 million years BC. It was a lot more popular with college-age boys than Snoopy. Now, as a teenager, I often went to work with my father on weekends or when school was not in session. My grandmother, who was born in 1890 and had been in business her entire adult life, she ran the office, and I learned a lot from her. This is the kind of adding machine that she had on her desk. Eventually, she got an electric model, which eliminated the handle. Then in the mid-70s, my dad stood in a long line outside a department store to buy the first electric 4-function calculator for $300. He was so amazed at its speed that he actually went back to stand in line again at the store to buy one for my grandmother, because he knew she would appreciate it. At her apartment a month later, I found it on her desk, and right beside it, a small notepad with a lot of handwritten arithmetic scribbles and pencil. So at dinner, I asked her if she was checking the math of the new calculator. And when she said yes, of course, I asked her why she didn't trust it. And her answer was priceless. She said, "It comes up with the answers so fast, it must be guessing." Of course, a year or 2 later, the size and the price tag of those calculators became much, much smaller. My father was in the ballpoint pen business, supplying the promotional products industry. He sold his first company to Scripto and ran it for 12 years until he was fired in 1970 in a boardroom dispute. He started a new company the same year, but the startup was struggling. My dad asked me to help him in the summer before my senior year at Tufts. He sent me to Copenhagen and London to learn how pens were being screen printed in Europe and South Africa on a hunch that it might kickstart some business growth. He was right. I didn't expect the pen business to become my career, but I liked the challenge of starting something new and working with my father because I knew the company would eventually become mine. Screen printing got us off the ground because it was more legible and durable than older, inferior printing methods. We also avoided the OSHA problems of hazardous lacquer spray booths. Later on, I expanded the product line to include flashlights and clip dispensers, highlighters, and what became my world-famous solar-powered pen. Not real, but we sold a lot of them. In the office, Dad invested in Burroughs accounting machines that used magnetic stripe ledger cards to store the same data that you could see printed on them. There were sets of cards for each program these machines could run, such as payroll, inventory, invoicing, and so forth. You could think of it as a relational data. A box of hundreds of cards was like a customer table. Each card was a customer record, and each printed row on the card represented a related record, like an invoice or a payment. And if you're old enough to have had a savings account with a bank book, these cards were the same idea as bank books, except that bank books didn't have the magnetic stripes, which were the new technology then. The Burroughs machines were programmed with punched paper tapes. Each program was stored in a plastic dispenser like a reel of movie film. The paper tapes were delicate and had to be handled carefully. We rarely spent the money for Mylar tapes unless we were certain that no more programming changes were needed. When you switched from one program to another, like from payroll to invoicing, you would just feed in the tape for that program. When I needed something custom that wasn't readily available from Burroughs, I hired a freelance programmer to create a special paper tape for me. If the machine needed maintenance or more memory, a Burroughs technician was on call. The software was the tapes, and the magstripe cards were the storage. I spent my vacation in 1980 in a Burroughs class in Pasadena to learn about computer disks. They were large, circular, rigid plastic devices about 20 inches in diameter. We intended to eventually replace our magstripe accounting machines with these newer, more modern hardware. But that installation and upgrade turned out to be a total failure. Instead, we went with Basic 4 hardware and a programmer who had what I considered the skeleton of a software system we could adapt to our needs. It took about a year to have him write the code in Basic for our order processing and customer service. Payroll and inventory didn't require any kind of custom work. A few years later, I hired a student who was learning Basic in high school. He was at my side and in my office constantly, creating a variety of totally custom features that we couldn't buy anywhere, such as order status and barcoding, our sales contest management, and internal company news. And one of my pet peeves with FileMaker has been that I miss being able to get whatever I want with a combination of time, money, and patience. I find it frustrating that even money can't buy all the things that I've ever wanted FileMaker to be able to do. Family business turned out to be a personal crisis for me as my dad got older and he was reluctant to retire and less willing to take the same calculated risks he did 10 years earlier. I decided to resign, and very soon I was recruited to be a consultant to the Papermate division of Gillette. I hated chemistry in high school, but I needed to study the plastic molecular structure to develop a method of printing their Erasermate retail products, because polypropylene plastic resists any kind of surface penetration. By flame treating the pens right before applying the imprint, the heated up molecules sort of vibrated and separated enough to allow the ink to penetrate. And then when they cooled off, the ink had bonded with the molecular structure of the plastic. My next consulting client was Jim Bouton, the New York Yankee pitcher who wrote a bestseller called Ball 4. And he was also selling a chewing gum product called Big League Chew that was like chewing tobacco for kids. When he wanted to launch his new Big League Cards product in the promo industry, he hired me to design his trade show exhibit, and produces sales literature. While I was setting up Boughton's exhibit, at the booth next door to mine, there was somebody using an Apple II computer. It was the first time I'd seen a personal computer. I understood how my company's accounting machines were programmed with those spools of punched paper tape, but watching him swap those 5-inch floppy disks in and out of the card readers made no sense to me at all. But a few years later, after I learned more about PCs, I bought an Apple IIc of my own. Another one of my endeavors at the time was the production of VHS videotapes of trade show exhibitors. A camera crew and reporter went from booth to booth interviewing each company about their new products. And the video was edited after the convention and sold to companies who either couldn't afford to send their entire sales team to Texas for a week, or they found the tapes useful for researching companies whose booths they didn't manage to visit in person. Well, soon I needed a computer at home for my growing business. I couldn't afford an IBM PC, but the Sony SMC70 was about half the price. It was a CPM system, and the father-son owner of the computer store got me started with a system like this one, with a small printer and an external hard drive. Sony was the first to market those rigid plastic 3.5-inch diskettes, and the Sony screen had one font, green, on a dark display. The hard drive could store a total of 20 megabytes, not gigabytes, these were megabytes, and it cost me nearly $4,000. In 1984, I had to finance it with a lease purchase. I still have it in the basement at home, but the Sony doesn't boot up anymore, and I've lost all the diskettes. When I explained to the computer store what I wanted to do with that computer, they sold me MicroPro's InfoStar software. InfoStar consisted of DataStar for the database, ReportStar for the reports, and with WordStar, you could edit the raw data files using word processing tools. 10 years before we got FileMaker's version 3, this was already a relational database system. All my reports were output on tractor feed paper at 6 lines per inch, 66 lines per page. And even today, 40 years later, I miss certain printing features we don't have in FileMaker, and I'll show you one of them later on. I also connected a modem to the Sony computer. One of my fellow members on the local zoning board that I chaired, he wanted to connect with me by computer from home. Mine was a 300 baud modem, and I found it so frustrating that it took so long to connect to him. I told my friend that I could drive over to his house to talk with him faster than the computers could connect. But of course, that was just the beginning, and today's bandwidth and speeds were probably considered science fiction back then. With my modem, I was able to connect to services like CompuServe and Western Union EasyLink. For my travel incentive client, which was a consortium of 5 non-competitive sponsor companies who shared the same customers, I gathered CSV files every week from each of them using EasyLink that consisted of just 2 fields, an account number and a dollar amount. The result was a weekly report that was shipped by FedEx to all 5 sponsors the same day that their CSV files were received. And for their customers whose increased sales were earning them free trips to Switzerland, progress reports were printed and inserted into window envelopes and mailed. And that was 40 years ago when first-class postage was 22 cents. Those progress reports were a bit of a problem. Customers thought that they were receiving an invoice, and they complained that they don't owe that money. The following year, we rearranged the report form so that the 5 numbers were in a row instead of a column. And still, some people mistook it for a statement with agents. So I went back to the computer store and asked for something that could turn those numbers into a graph to illustrate how close people were to winning their trip. The owner said to me, "Yes, there's something coming next month. It's called a Macintosh." And he sold me the software, suggesting that I take the manual with me the next day on my trip to Hong Kong. I bought that first Macintosh that day in 1985, expecting to take delivery when I returned from Hong Kong. It had a built-in 5 megabyte hyperdrive, which tended to cause the Mac to crash whenever the drive overheated. I also played around a bit with HyperCard, but I never found a practical use for it. The new software he sold me was called Lotus Jazz. It was the first of many Works programs like Microsoft Works and Apple Works that came later. Jazz was like Lotus 123 on steroids. The Hot View feature let you select something in one module and make it dynamically appear in another, like mail merge, only it was effortless. And I could output my graphs on beautiful color stationery that I got for free from the Hong Kong Tourist Bureau. My flights to and from Hong Kong were 17 hours each way. I passed the time on those flights reading every page of the manual, so by the time I got my hands on the Mac when I got home, I knew exactly what I needed to do. It was my first classic lesson in read the frigging manual. A year later, in 1986, the computer store owner told me that I needed to stop using Jazz and begin to learn something new called FileMaker. I couldn't imagine anything better than Jazz, but I trusted him, and today I'm glad to say that he was right. When my father had some health problems around that time, I still owned half the company. To help Dad retire, I structured a merger with his biggest competitor. It doubled the size of the company, and my new partner and I bought out my father's interest. When I returned to full-time work there in June of '86, I found that my dad was still doing his product pricing with the same round German slide rule as always. The clear sliding plastic piece with the red line is missing from this photo. It must have broken off long ago. But after he used a pencil to write the parts and labor costs on his template photocopies, he used that slide rule to set his selling prices. The bigger the order quantity, the lower the selling price, but nothing automatically prevented the mistake of having a larger quantity with a higher price than a smaller quantity. I got this illustration online that shows how you use those round slide rules, although I'm sure I never will. I'd learned enough about PCs and spreadsheets by then, so I bought my dad a Mac and taught him how to replace his slide rule with multiplan. He was fascinated by the ease of making changes without a pencil and eraser, and how a file could be duplicated for the next product he was going to work on. He loved that Mac, and my mother told me that the biggest fights she ever had with my dad was getting him to turn off the damn computer and come to the dinner table. On my way home from work one day, I stopped at a stationery store to buy a ribbon for my Okidata printer. The store owner asked me what kind of computer I used, and I described my Sony SMC70. He referred me to one of his customers who used the same Sony computer, and he wanted me to write an invoicing program for them. I can't remember that client's name, but I completed the job in a few months, and that was the genesis of my career in programming for somebody other than myself. Back in the pen business in 1986, I left my Mac at home and brought the Sony computer to work for special projects. My Okidata printer was painfully slow, so I remembered my envy of that client's bigger, faster Okidata printer. It stood on legs and it ran reports on wide green bar paper. I called the client to ask for the model number of the printer, and a lady gave me the answer. But our conversation was something that I've never forgotten because it became a guiding principle to me for any database development I've done for any client ever since. "Are you still using that program I wrote?" I asked her. And she said, "Yeah, we couldn't live without it." "But you haven't called me for nearly 2 years. And she said, "Well, why should we? It works." My divorce went through the US Supreme Court in 1988, and it convinced me to sell my interest in the pen business to my partners to be able to relocate to California after cross-country visitation became an expensive and emotional nightmare for me and my kids. My partners had forced me into a 2-year non-compete agreement that made me postpone my future business plans and look for a job. I was introduced to a startup company in New York that hired me from my promo industry experience. Their parent company made the annual diary that American Express promotes to its members with that negative option marketing scheme, where unless you decline, they automatically send you the diary and charge you for it. Anyway, after I quadrupled this startup company's annual sales in 1991, I found a better opportunity for the following year with a company in Bogota, Colombia. Davini produces their calendars with paper made from sugarcane, not trees. That was long before recycled paper became acceptable. A special leather-covered diary to commemorate the 500th anniversary of the Christopher Columbus discovery of the New World was only printed in Spanish. They hired me to translate it into English for sales in the UK and USA, and I traveled to their factory in Bogota several times to teach their production team how to use Quark Express for their calendar layouts. By the end of 1991, my non-competition agreement had run its course, and I was able to launch the new business I had in mind. Waiting 2 years was really a blessing in disguise because I used those months to be better prepared with skills in Illustrator and Quark that became the basis of my new service. An outsourced service bureau that converted faxed images to vector illustrations, and then output the result on high-res paper from an image setter and delivered overnight to factories who needed camera-ready art to produce their customer orders. FileMaker was used for my accounting and order management, and it also drove the image setter. I began in Connecticut and then relocated to California where the company could grow and eventually hire employees. In the early evolution of the company, most of the output was on high-resolution paper for suppliers who expected camera-ready black and white artwork. Later, output to film positives for screen printing and negatives for offset lithography became routine. By the mid-1990s, many factories could receive and handle 3.5-inch diskettes with files no bigger than 1.5 megs. By the turn of the century, delivery by email and FTP became more common. And gradually, our incoming business slowed down as customers tried to eliminate our costs by sending their JPEGs and sketches directly to factories where they expected the pre-press to be done for free. In fact, however, those factories were becoming inundated with useless artwork files that were incorrect size, wrong format, or not prepared for the kind of color separation required for printing processes. For example, if you print black t-shirts with white ink, there's some technical challenges that most graphic artists know nothing about. PPAI, the Promotional Products Association, was besieged with complaints from their supplier members to do something about the epidemic of inferior artwork that was increasing their costs, extending backlogs, and resulting in missed delivery dates for dated merchandise. The trade association hired me as a consultant to educate the marketplace in a 4-year quality improvement campaign consisting of seminars, on-site visits, and published readiness standards. And as successful as it was, it signaled the coming dead end of my career, having taught an entire industry to do what I had been doing exclusively until then. Well, the promulgation of those new readiness standards led to many on-site consultations with the artwork and pre-press staff of suppliers of all sizes. 3M is an example of one of the largest companies who engaged me to create a set of templates for each of their posted products. Templates like this one are still in use today. This example of a 3-inch cube pad shows experienced artists at ad agencies how to prepare artwork for screen printing on the sides of a cube and offset lithography on the sheets of paper that form the pad. Another example is a supplier of magnets whose team of 40 customer service and art department employees had never heard of Suitcase for font management, which I observed when I visited their factory in Missouri. The result was the elimination of thousands of hours of wasted time and a corresponding increase in customer satisfaction. The annual bottom line savings for them was incalculable. Well, the decreasing sales of my graphic art services was compensated with an increase in FileMaker development. The Maxim Marin user group had a special meeting for FileMaker users. I remember one such meeting when FileMaker 3 was new, and someone presented the way to make a self-relationship. My comment from the back row was overheard when I said, "How very California." I also participated in a group of recently divorced men and women. It seemed like wherever I went, people were struggling with relationships. By keeping up to date on new releases, participating in the local user group, and running my own on-premise server and developing for the web with Lasso, my FileMaker sales volume gradually replaced the lost income from art services in the promo industry. One evening, I won the door prize at one of the DIGFM meetings at the Wedge. It was a diskette actually, for FileMaker server. In 2004, a more modern online art studio that I could sell is something I conceived to offer to one of the major industry tech service providers and eventually wind my payroll down to zero. Built on the model of a taxi dispatch, I recruited freelance artists located anywhere who could log in to pick up and complete jobs that needed their talent and upload their finished work before downloading the next job in the queue. The new company was called Artwork Zone, and my contract required me to design it, launch it, and attend trade shows to promote it. By the middle of 2005, my job was completed. So I went too far. There we go. In the spring of 2005, I was making plans to relocate to Dallas, Texas for a new consulting opportunity with the Promotional Products Association. And with several months to spare before the move, I used Adobe InDesign to self-publish my book, Your Imprint Here. It was well received, and I sold about 2,000 books before my inventory was all gone. So that takes me into my FileMaker career. I've always found that meeting in person with a new prospective client is the best way to earn the business and build a solid foundation for the project. Screen sharing these days is great, but the eye contact isn't the same, and you can't be sure that they're not checking their email or distracted while you talk. Meeting people like the IT manager and someone who can be your primary contact is invaluable. And because most people don't really know what FileMaker can do, if you ask questions and keep your eyes open, you can usually see things that they wouldn't think of telling you. Gathering information about the computers and their displays is a good use of that on-site time. You can feel the bandwidth for yourself, and that's a lot better than learning later on that their connection is too slow. You can discuss the project scope and explain how FileMaker's licensing works, and visiting with some of the on-site users will also give you valuable input. So I'm going to show you two examples. KLZ Stone in Dallas is an importer of granite and marble slabs from Italy and Brazil. When stone is mined from the ground, it gets sliced like a loaf of bread into slabs like the ones you see here. Each group of similar slabs is called a bundle. An office worker with a Canon SureShot camera walked around the yard when the freight was delivered, taking pictures of the first slab in each bundle, and sales reps used iPads to show those products to customers. The customers were the fabricators who ordered whatever they needed for things like kitchen countertops and even floors in office buildings. The problem that I was tasked to solve was that the freight company charged overtime if it took more than 4 hours to unload each container. The lady with the Canon camera was slowing the process down, taking the pictures, and afterward she had to match up the photos to the inventory in FileMaker by manually inserting each picture into a container field. The boss was angry that it was costing him more money while she took all that time. So I created a FileMaker Go app that enabled her to scan the barcode on the corner of each slab and then use her phone to capture the photo directly into the FileMaker record. That solved the problem of the excess cost of unloading freight. But she complained that she couldn't do the process because she can't create the inventory records in FileMaker until the freight arrives. Well, I knew better because I had imported enough in my businesses over the years. So that's when I suggested that they've got to already know what's incoming 3 weeks beforehand. And they could create those inventory records in FileMaker as soon as they get the bill of lading. The boss enjoyed scolding that assistant for her not thinking of that herself. One day, as I was walking around the yard, it occurred to me that there must be millions of dollars in their inventory. I asked the owner if his bank was giving him any trouble about financing his inventory, and he closed the door and told me that the fabricators called to put slabs on hold, and then nobody bothers to reverse that after a long time, so they end up ordering the same product multiple times. I suggested using their on-premise server to send emails to the customers who put things on hold after 10 days, giving them 3 more days to make up their mind, or the product would be returned to active inventory where it could be sold to someone else. The result was hundreds of thousands of bottom line savings. Now, Excel has a variety of weaknesses that are easy to identify. And this is an example of a babysitting business that uses Excel to manage the appointment schedules. I shouldn't say uses it, they used it before they converted to FileMaker. The problems that I observed before I replaced Excel with FileMaker were things like incorrect weekdays compared to the actual appointment date, appointments accidentally scheduled. For example, if you type 2101 instead of 2011, it would just get scheduled for 90 years into the future. So when sorting by date, there were missing appointments, and names were not chosen from a drop-down list, so they were vulnerable to typos. And they couldn't sort by last name because the first and last names were not in separate columns. And the meaning of those colors was something that the owner kept in her head. But the really unusual thing was the way that I acquired this client, who was a working mom. Her husband asked me to meet him privately for drinks one afternoon. As he put it, he needed a software developer to save his marriage. Well, I said, I'm not capable of that. And he explained that his wife created her business and is so busy 24/7, struggling with Excel and sales growth, that they no longer have a sex life. He said he had three choices: divorce, marriage counseling, both of which are expensive and time-consuming, or he could hire me to replace Excel with a proper database app. The system that I built validated all the data entries for accuracy, produced some predefined reports for her, and it enabled his wife to run a script every Saturday that created all the invoices, and on Sundays she charged all the credit cards that we kept on file securely. I'm glad to say that their kids are now grown and they're still happily married. Here's another one. At Unilever's headquarters in New Jersey, there was a team of about 24 employees who worked on package designs for products like Lipton tea and Lay's potato chips. They were not on Unilever's payroll. They worked for a temp agency that required weekly reporting to pay each person for their weekly hours. Someone in IT created a set of 36 Excel files, all linked together the way you can do in Excel if you know how. I'm talking about 30 files, not 30 worksheets in a single file. So every Monday, each employee was given a fresh set of these 30 files, empty of all data except things that didn't change, like the list of products and budgets. Each employee was expected to keep track of their time on each project, not only so that they could be paid at the end of the week, but also for project managers to know how much of their budget was consumed. But reality was different. Instead of using those Excel files all week, they waited until after lunch on Friday, and then they wasted the entire afternoon guessing at what they had worked on since Monday. So their time report could be faxed to the temp agency. Otherwise, they wouldn't be paid. Entries in Excel were inaccurate, and of course, nothing got done while they completed their paper time reports by hand. Now, annually, that came to 39,000 Excel files stored on their server, which I replaced with a single FileMaker database. It was version 7 at the time. They logged in each morning and out each afternoon. And there was a mini clock that floated in the corner of their display. We sort of copied what iTunes had at the time, while the foreground application they worked in was Photoshop or InDesign, so they could easily start or stop or pause any project. On Friday at 5 o'clock, they pushed one button and the script generated their time report, an exact image of the agency's paper form that I recreated on a FileMaker layout. And all they had to do was pick it up on the printer adjacent to the fax machine and send it out by fax before leaving for the weekend. Project managers got accurate reports, weekly productivity increased by 10%, and the headquarters of Unilever in Chicago was jealous because they didn't think of it first. As long as you have Microsoft Access on a Windows computer, or as I do in a Parallels virtual machine, it's not too hard to convert an Access file to FileMaker. Data from Access can be exported and then imported into FileMaker, and the first row will create the field names. The Access relationship graph actually resembles FileMaker's, so you can replace the same joined fields in FileMaker that you can see in Access. Then you can begin creating your layouts and scripts with your client providing direction for how their work in Access has to function when it's converted in FileMaker. And container fields that don't exist in Access are a big FileMaker selling point for many years. It's been a long time since I got any calls from Bento users because it doesn't run on the current Mac OS. But if you happen to have an older Mac that can still open a Bento file, there's a chance that you can do something useful, especially if the data happens to be contacts or calendar items, because Bento is great for one thing, presenting those two tables in a table view, which can't be done with Apple's calendar or contacts apps. Table views enable you to make hundreds of data corrections in a fraction of the time if you need that before you import the Bento CSV exported records into FileMaker. Believe it or not, there are still people using FileMaker versions with the FP3, FP5, or FP7 formats. If you can still run those legacy applications in a Windows computer, you can then incrementally update the old files to the current FMP12 format. The main problem is that people still using those ancient software versions seldom have the budget for this. One exception is the scenario where the data in their old files is so valuable and they have no other way to recover it but to hire you to get that done. Once in a while, you get a call from someone smart enough to realize that they can't become a database developer on their own. And I don't know what happened to my slides going backwards, but bear with me.
You might be leaning on the back arrow or something.
No, I know what happened. I was using the side arrow instead of the down arrow. So I'll just go right here and pick it up where we left off. Here it is. Apologize. So we access, Bento, legacy. There are people who they've built their own databases, including several land users who access a file with peer-to-peer sharing. And progress can be made as long as you don't mind visiting their location to work on their system. Yes, they'll suggest remote screen sharing, but that doesn't let you use your own tools. First, you have to educate them to explain what proper hosting is about for their own sake. And if they put the database on an Office file server expecting it to function as a multi-user database, you have to explain why that's just not healthy. I recently recovered a correct file that was run by a solo user on a laptop that wasn't plugged in when his battery died. Sometimes you can persuade customers to begin using FileMaker Go to overcome the budget hesitation they may have about licensing. And as long as their file is hosted, they've got free clients in the mobile apps that they can use. I'm not a big fan of FileMaker Cloud because I've experienced recovery of a database that became corrupted in the original Amazon infrastructure. Instead, I don't think that the current version, even though it's better, is still not as good as an on-premise server because of constraints like plugins and the Claris ID. If you're a Claris partner, you can explore the solution bundle agreement if you think your database can be sold to a vertical market. Buying licenses at greatly reduced prices is a compelling reason to look into this. In recent years, new tools make it possible to update your customers' apps more easily than before. Nevertheless, there still are some business drawbacks. We no longer see a FileMaker splash screen when we launch the app, and the optional closing screen is also gone. But with the new Windows script step, you can overcome these issues to handle your branding. Claris doesn't seem to mind the fact that when somebody installs FileMaker Pro to run your custom solution, nothing prevents them from creating their own FileMaker apps or accessing others besides the one they bought from you. Unfortunately, this can lead to conversations that put you in a difficult position of defending a marketing method and licensing scheme that you didn't create. My SBA experience usually begins with a client who thinks that my creation should be sold to other similar companies. I had that experience with an artist who needed to keep track of her paintings at various East Coast galleries, manage the shipping to and from those galleries, and make her paintings visible online. The two things I find to be the hardest to overcome are the fact that I can't be both a salesman and a developer. Unless the SBA app sells itself, you'll have to wear two hats. or hire a salesperson, excuse me. In other instances, a veterinarian who's known for his expertise with international pet shipping functioned as my subject matter expert, showing me what the software should do to print documents, obtain cargo rates, and manage point-to-point shipments of household pets for customers. However, without a dedicated salesperson, I found it difficult when prospects looked at demonstrations and reported that they don't transact business the way that the app was designed to do. Of course, my expert believed that everyone else should do it his way. So ultimately, I've had more success converting those leads into custom variations of the original SBA solution, customized to what the client actually wants to do. FileMaker Go is easy to recommend to clients who want to access portable data. This is an app for a fly fishing enthusiast to explore various foreign excursions and coordinate with the retail store to manage their travel. While Claris hasn't yet made an Android version and maybe never will, the simplicity of making the app leverage the camera, the phone, and maps that are in every iPhone makes it easy to jumpstart a new mobile database. This app replaced paper clipboards for technicians who maintain residential and commercial swimming pools. And we mounted an iPad on their office wall to use as a payroll time clock. Most phones are held in portrait mode, and it's not hard to configure layouts that present the data or graphs in landscape mode when a script trigger detects the orientation change. Now, with so many different iPhone sizes in use, I've given up making layouts that are designed to exactly fit the stencils we see in layout mode, which is really an incomplete list. With iPads, it's much easier to design for landscape layouts using the same aspect ratio as the layouts used on desktop and laptop windows in Pro. Any script that I create to be triggered by on-first window open will always set global variables for the platform and the device, so any navigation and other features can easily leverage those settings. Likewise, you can detect if the iPad is equipped with a cellular account and use FaceTime for phone calls over Wi-Fi when it's not. Just like with FileMaker Pro, internet access is necessary for features that use the web viewer or browser or insert from URL, for example. Custom dialogues work in iOS as you would expect, and so do popovers and slide controls. Objects in the top and bottom navigation parts don't become hidden or illegible if users pinch to zoom in or out. Using the iOS SDK, you can convert a database to become a native iOS app, and then you'll need to respect Apple's guidelines if you intend to distribute or sell the app in their Apple App Store. Another option is a company in Scotland called LiveCode, who offers software called LiveCode for FM, which promises to convert FileMaker apps not only to iOS, but also to Android. I've tried this a few times, and each time I've hit a dead end because of a FileMaker feature that LiveCode couldn't handle. The first time it was privilege sets in the security area, but more recently my app failed to convert because LiveCode doesn't leverage the FileMaker data API that you need for the Claris calendar add-on. The compatibility checker in Script Workspace is handy, but beware of the word partial if you consult the help file to figure out why something isn't fully compatible. The help file seldom describes why or how something is only partially compatible. If your client needs your app to work on any Android devices, you can create layouts for WebDirect. Again, not all features are compatible, so you need to explore what your client needs. I made this chart to easily remember which is which. For my system platform variable in Windows, I just use the absolute value of -2 to detect Microsoft Windows, and my on first open script makes sure that the FileMaker menu is not hidden for Windows people in Pro. A few years ago, someone in the community published a database called AppMaker. I've made a few modifications to it and always use it to create a profile that users will see as a home screen icon on their iPhones and iPads. AppMaker uses the Base Elements plugin to create an XML profile and sends it to somebody by email. That profile gets installed when the email attachment is opened on the target device. Installed profiles can be found in the settings under General and VPN and Device Management. When I first used FileMaker before Claris acquired it, this may have been considered a handy feature for newbies who were making primitive databases. Adding newly created fields to whatever is the current layout remains a setting that is on by default. The reason I mention it is because if you're ever controlling a client server remotely, using FileMaker Pro locally on that server, or if you find it necessary to install Pro on someone else's machine, be sure to uncheck this setting. Otherwise, you might get a call, as I did recently, when a new field appeared at the bottom of a report layout and everyone was in a panic mode wondering what the field is and where it came from. I really think Claris should have changed this default long ago. FileMaker Server requires full access accounts to have passwords. So it's a good idea to add a password to the default admin account if you're going to keep it and upload the file to a server. But if you make the admin account inactive, it can be uploaded without this warning. While we're on the subject of passwords, here's a workaround to a problem you may have encountered. Even when you're logged in with full access, anything you try to adjust in file options will give you this message. If auto login is enabled for an account that doesn't have full access. Even something as simple as the minimum version number can't be changed. Makes no sense to me, because if you have full access, you should be able to do anything. The workaround is to go to Manage Security and temporarily give that account full access. Then, after you make your changes in file options, go back to Manage Security to restore whatever was the original privilege set for that account. Here's a reason to create custom menus that change the way delete record behaves. In previous versions, I've reported a persistent issue about the overlapping positions of the Perform, Find, and Delete record buttons. It seems to have been fixed in version 21, but Perform, Find in Find mode is still dangerously close to the Delete record button in Browse mode. So if you've ever gotten a phone call from somebody who asks, "Why am I seeing this dialog? I didn't delete anything," it's because pressing the Perform, Find with a sustained or a double click will immediately prompt the user to permanently delete whatever becomes the first or only record after the find. I prefer building interfaces that hide the status area, but some people insist on using it. So if you make a custom menu that removes the delete menu item, the delete button will not appear in the toolbar or the FileMaker menu. Or you can instead assign a script to safely perform the delete operation and avoid that funky warning. Doing it with a script also gives you control over any cascading deletes, as I'll show you when we go to relationships. Personally, the only status area buttons that I ever use in my own FileMaker application are Debugger, Data Viewer, and Manage. Customized Status Toolbar is not saved in the database, so each user can customize their own status toolbar unless you remove that menu item from the View menu. Likewise, turning advanced tools on or off is something that any user can change in their FileMaker application preferences. Now, if you create a custom View menu, the only menu commands that it comes with are zoom in and out. This means that your users won't be able to customize their own toolbars or use any other View menu commands unless you deliberately add them to your custom View menu. Another thing worth doing when setting up a new database is to create a triggered script that runs on first window open, even if it's modified later on. It should include a script step that detects with get application version if the server is opening the database, and it exits the script to proceed with any scheduled script or perform script on server scripts that might make that file open up. If Advanced Tools is not turned on, make sure that you do it and then restart your FileMaker Pro app right away. It's a good idea to import any favorite custom functions into your new file before any other imports. That way, any scripts or fields that use custom functions won't result in import errors. Also, when you're completely finished setting up a brand new database, you can keep it handy on your computer for future use and avoid repeating the same steps every time you create a new file. On a Mac, you can even turn on the stationary pad feature in Get Info, which is a Mac OS feature that I often use for things like spreadsheets and letterheads that I don't want to configure from scratch whenever I create a new file or document. I also like to rename my various versions of FileMaker the way you see here. When you want to copy and paste things like layouts from one file to another, running two versions of FileMaker avoids having to close one file to open another. Another task that benefits from this strategy is the editing of privilege sets, which allows you to compare the granular details of managed security in two open files side by side. You don't see FileMaker 20 in my little screenshot list because I had to trash it last week and I haven't yet reinstalled it. Right now, the Claris app icons make it easy to tell the versions apart, but I wouldn't count on that always being the case because I can't predict how many different colors are going to be used for that new ugly FileMaker Pro logo we see. Make sure that the XML file called FM default fields is present in your FileMaker Pro application package contents before you create any new tables. That way you'll be sure to have the fields you prefer, and the only table you'll ever need to modify is the one that was created when the file itself was first launched. At Goya in Australia, an employee named Salvatore created an app a few years ago that makes the creation of that XML file simple and error-free. Here you can see the app and the file path where the XML file should be placed in a Mac. Save a backup and then relaunch FileMaker Pro to have your own default fields take effect. I don't know if Salvatore still works for Goya or if they still have that app available, but I really think it's worth looking for. I recommend adding a custom file icon in File Options before you upload it to the server. In my experience, these icons have a way of disappearing. They should be persistent, but sometimes they vanish from the favorites dialog even when they're still visible in recents. Your users will benefit from an icon that they recognize instead of the Claris logos that remain in their dock or system tray even after they update their software version. It would be great if Claris would do something about the Apex Blue theme that many developers like me dislike. We can't modify it, and even if you make sure no layout objects are using it and you delete it, the next time you create or import a table, it comes back again like acid reflux. But if you make several themes you can apply to your layouts, at least when you encounter Apex Blue, you can swap the theme, even if you still have to adjust the various layout views, parts, and other setup attributes.
Well,
Sorry.
wait a second. I was going to interrupt here.
Yeah.
I was just wondering if anybody had any comments on this issue with Apex Blue. I mean, because normally what I do is I just duplicate whatever there is and then just modify the copy of the theme. Is that the issue you're talking about, or?
Yeah, it is. And the other thing I would add is that I saw in the community recently somebody was suggesting a real good way to deal with Apex Blue, which would be to have Claris give us some themes that are already built for iOS and for WebDirect with the fonts that those systems need. It would be a big improvement over what we have now with Apex Blue.
Agreed. I'd love it to die.
Oh,
well,
me?
you know, one of the reasons that
one of our presenters was a creator of Apex Blue. Yeah.
Well, I'm hoping to build some support for some things like that with a community of people who might have more influence than I have alone.
Hey, let me jump in. What we do here is, or what I do is, if I'm building a lot of layouts, I'll have one called template, template detail, template list. Don't use table much, but there's just two for the most part. And then I'll just duplicate them. I'll get them right once, and then I'll duplicate them until we wait for something else to happen.
Good. So if your data tables include any container fields and you expect the table to have more than a few records, I recommend turning on secure external storage. I learned my lesson about open storage the hard way when I found that users will insert documents that have the same name, like letter.pdf, in different records. The server appends a numeral rather than overwriting the file, but the behavior of the server will be slower in open storage. And if you ever need to access a particular container item by its name, it could be very tedious to determine by its content if you have the right one. For example, one of my clients is a veterinarian, and until I changed it to secure storage, there are hundreds of files that were named health certificate. And besides, there are many dogs that were all named Buster, and all the cats were named Fluffy. The last and most important step before uploading the file to the server is encrypt at rest. If your file is hosted in a secure data center, you don't have to worry much about theft of the actual file, but if it's running on-premise somewhere, you can't be certain that the closet or the server room is secure enough to prevent somebody from getting into the server or even stealing the machine itself. And then do two more things. Keep the encryption key somewhere where you'll remember it, and always use that hint feature to remind yourself if you forget. And even if you're not ready for the file to be uploaded to a production server, did I hear someone's voice?
Oh yeah, I'll wait till you're done with this part.
Oh, okay. Well, go ahead now, because I was going to jump into something else about server.
Okay. Just on the side, we have a little bit of discussion about secure storage. I wanted to open up discussion on that. I guess if somebody else had some bad experiences uploading files with secure storage.
Yeah, I'm really questioning secure storage now. It's the only way that you can decrypt those files after they've been encrypted is with the FileMaker file header. So if you ever lost that FileMaker file for whatever reason, then all of your encrypted files are gone. But no one can able to get. And also had some particularly bad experiences uploading a file to a FileMaker server, and none of those files came with it. So.
Yeah, that always worried me too. I think when that first came out, I was like, I really want these always to be. I mean, there's a few cases where I just go ahead and use it. But yeah, I mean, if you had a backup of the original file, would that still work to decrypt it, or?
Possibly.
Yeah.
If it was in the same location. I mean, the other thing is, I think the problem in inverted commas with people putting files into that place and renaming files in that place is not a problem with the process. It's a problem with you setting up your network access. If you're going to give people access to that folder, then that's your problem, not the FileMaker problem.
One of the things I found useful is when I set up that path for the external or the external container, I will usually inject year and month in the UUID of the record so that I can actually kind of get a gist of how much content they're generating each year or each month, and then plan appropriately for backups and or a third disk or something.
You put that in the file name or in a folder name?
In the path, in the dialog settings, you can actually append paths to what the folder is where the container object is gonna live.
Okay, so you have a grouping of folders per month or whatever.
Exactly, kind of like iTunes or iPhotos does internally.
Yeah, I've done that.
Good. So even if you're not ready to upload your file to a production server, your FileMaker license allows you to run a development server of your own, and the file should be uploaded to a server before you begin doing any serious development. And when you're uploading the file to a server, similar to what you just said about the hosting location, be sure to specify the folder that you want it to go in, so that if you decide to run any backups of a selected folder, you can do that. If the file has been encrypted, then you need to use the admin console to open it after uploading. And if it's a new file and hasn't been developed very much yet, then you'll never have a problem uploading it to the server because it's really small. If you want to allow the file to be visible in the launch center, either for Pro or WebDirect, specify in sharing who should be able to see and access that database, because you can even accidentally lock yourself out. I did that once when I found that the extended privilege for FileMaker Pro was turned off for a full access user, which was me. To discourage experienced hackers who have a FileMaker client, I almost always hide the files from view in the launch center. I used to travel on long flights more often than I do these days. And I could pass the time in flight doing development work without internet access if my laptop had FileMaker Server installed. I had no worry about the file being corrupted if it wasn't closed properly. When the flight attendant comes around and says, you got to stop working, and you just shut the lid of the computer. I just had to remember to upload the file to the laptop before I left home to go to the airport, if not to the server, at least to the desktop of the laptop. Now, relationships are a big deal. I realize that anchor buoy is a very popular method of arranging table occurrences, but it's not my preference. Long ago, I happened to stumble on a method of my own, and several years later, Todd Geist gave the name selector connector to his method that very closely resembled my own. Basically, I create one table with only one field, and I either call it globals or settings. I make sure that no privilege sets other than full access are allowed to create or delete records in that table. And on startup, I also run a scripted check to make sure that if somehow another record was created in that table by a full access account, the newer one gets deleted. Even if the table is named globals, the fields that hold any permanent data, like logos or the client's name and address, are ordinary fields, not globals. They can be repeat fields, as I always do for the SMTP account that's used for sending email. If there are fields the client needs to have access to, then I create a layout that I call a control panel, where they can make changes, such as their address if they move. They don't have to call me to make any changes. If the database has any graphics for things like icons or buttons that go into container fields, then I just paste that same graphic on the layout beside the field, so it won't be missing if somehow the container field got cleared, or if I accidentally delete the only record in the table, I can restore it easily with copy paste. In short, I think of that table occurrence as if it was the root of a tree lying on its side. Colors can be used in a number of ways. In my opinion, there should be one table occurrence for every table that's assigned to a layout that uses a theme like minimalist, and it has no script triggers on it. You can always navigate to that layout in your scripts to add, edit, delete records. The perfect color for those table occurrences, in my view, is the neutral gray that you get by default for any new table, whether or not you change its name. I once thought of using colors to identify cascading deletes, but that turned out to be a bad idea because you can't see the color when you're writing a script or choosing the context for a layout. So I now use a prefix or a suffix like A or CD for add or cascading delete, or both if the table occurrence allows adding or deleting related records. The most common join predicate is the one that links fields with the equal sign. The other comparative operators are also handy, but they don't allow unindexed fields used in a join to work the way indexed fields do. So instead of relying on the Cartesian join, I use a different technique that accomplishes three things. I make sure that every table has a stored calculation field whose value is the number 1, and I name that field 1, spelling it out O-N-E. By joining fields that are named 1, I accomplish the same any-to-any relationship as the Cartesian operator. And I can also make the value 1 greater than a field in another table that's null, which allows me to make value lists that dynamically include only the related records that match accordingly. And third, I make a value list called 1, which is handy for any Boolean checkbox or radio button fields. Setting the related records as part of the join predicate is handy, but unless you have an occasion to use sorting, the ability to sort portals is just as good, even if you're creating something that allows the user to sort the portal based on a global field selection with a drop-down or a pop-up menu. The ability to add notes to the graph in any size, in any color, in any font is invaluable. I use it to write explanations about certain table occurrences or to group a number of them together in an organized way. Thankfully, Claris adjusted the appearance for printing, so you can now view your relationship graph in dark mode, but not use up all your toner or printer ink if you print the graph. Sometimes it's convenient to expose the field names in the table occurrences, but that isn't always possible if the graph is very crowded. Another recent change I like keeps the connector lines from becoming all tangled up if you happen to change the sort order of your tables or fields while you're in Managed Database. We know that a relationship graph doesn't have to be tidy or neatly aligned to make it work properly, but I'm sure we all react the same way when opening a messy graph made by somebody who's either too busy or lazy or selfish to consider the fate of the developer who may be next in line to work on that database. When it comes to naming conventions, there are dozens of styles and rules that have been proposed and adopted, and there are probably exceptions to each and every one of them. The best two things that I can say about how to name your table occurrences are, one, be consistent, and two, same as the way that you name your fields, avoid spaces and illegal characters. I think I also forgot to mention that the graphs can be less complicated these days because execute SQL can be used to produce the same calculated result independent of making a table occurrence. Lists of tables and fields have always allowed us to sort by creation order, type, name, and a custom sort order. But the two things I find lacking are columns that expose the creation and modification dates, and filters that would allow us to more quickly drill down to the field or table we're looking for. In the left sidebar in layout view, that kind of field name filter already exists, and you can create fields, new fields from that layout object as well. I use some simple field prefixes to indicate certain types of fields that are not necessarily self-evident in their field names. Serial numbers pose a risk in my experience. If you import records from previous versions, you can run the risk that the serial numbers will increment. And if the serial number field is used in a join predicate, the match will break. Yes, you can choose to not auto-enter serial numbers, but it's an all or nothing option. So you'll also not be auto-entering the other field types like modification and creation dates and lookups. Moreover, it means that you also have to examine all your number fields to make sure that you don't overlook the existence of any serial numbered fields. Instead, I prefer to use an auto-enter calculation that uses execute SQL to accomplish a nearly identical result. The inspector has a space where you can enter a notation that corresponds to the number in the field. Here I'm showing you the use of pounds to indicate the weight without a field label. I also use this for other measurements, and if it doesn't disrupt any arithmetic, because it behaves just like a field label or placeholder text. Watch out for zip codes. They're text, they're not numbers, and you'll quickly bump into this if you ever work with addresses in New England, New Jersey, or some Caribbean territories like Puerto Rico or the Virgin Islands. One of my customers helped me solve an issue with date formats because people in foreign countries express dates differently. Here in America, if you see a date expressed as 23/6, your brain takes a few seconds to realize that's June 23rd. The problem is that if leading zeros aren't used, a different kind of confusion can occur. 111 could be either November 1st or January 11th, and 8/4 could be either August 4th or April 8th. I happen to be the guy who discovered that the first release of FedEx Ship Manager overlooked that important detail. In my case, my customer was familiar with various international users, and at first he thought that the system clock in any computer would automatically manage date formats. Indeed, he was partly correct, because both Mac and Windows transform date values to respect the computer's settings, and so does FileMaker. But we found that the only bulletproof way to resolve it is to use custom date formatting in the inspector to present the date the way you can see October 10th shown here. I like to define my creation and modification date values the way you see them here, because I'd rather be certain that as calculated values, they're never going to change. Using 24-hour times can be helpful in layouts or portals where space doesn't allow the AM/PM suffix. I also find that TS works just as well as the longer word timestamp when writing calculations, so that became my habit long ago for naming any timestamp field. To avoid the label of a checkbox or radio button hugging the edge of the field, I like to insert enough padding to move the label out of the way so that the narrow width of the field border will conceal it. But this doesn't work in WebDirect, so I've learned to replace those tiny, nearly illegible buttons or radio buttons or checkbox fields with simulated objects of my own that I can hide or show based on the chosen field values, in this case, yes or no. What was I going to say here? There we go. I use a value list called 1 for the checkboxes and the radio buttons. Beside any container field, when hidden in browse mode and shown in find mode, I can enable finding the records with non-empty containers. Validation is important and powerful, but be careful how you define your validation calculation failure messages. Here's what happens when a field value that's not on a layout is being modified by something like a modification date. Because Claris doesn't reveal the field name, users don't know what to do when they're told about this field. If you're running a script that opens a new window to do something like add a new record, a message like this can be infuriating to users, and they often have to force quit to resolve it. If the purpose of a field isn't self-evident, then you can use the comment space to explain what it's for. If you're like me, you sometimes revisit a field that you created years ago and you wonder what the heck it was meant to do. Indexing is one of the most important and least understood attributes of fields. Back in my MicroPro InfoStar days, only one field in a data table, the key field, was indexed. One of the novel features of the primitive versions of FileMaker was its ability to index as many fields as desired, making it possible to find by any field on the layout. Of course, we take that for granted today, but indexes sometimes become corrupt, and often there's no need to increase the size of a file due to unnecessary indexing. One of my wish list ideas is to allow purging a field's index with a warning that would caution you before doing this on any field that's used in a relationship join. If a field is calculated or not indexed, the relationship join can't work well. When that happens, there are two ways to overcome that obstacle. Either change the definition to an auto-enter calculation that allows replacement of the field value if necessary, or redefine the calculation with execute SQL, which gives a result that usually can be indexed as long as it doesn't reference any unstored calculations in its definition. It's the increased file size that I struggle with. Claris tells us that creating indexes are as needed works for finds but not joins. Maybe they could give us a dialogue when creating joins that says, this field isn't indexed. Do you want to turn indexing on? The option for minimal versus all could also display a warning about the consequences of it selecting all when there are fields that have very long text values. Merge fields are wonderful because they display data on layouts without the actual rectangular field object. You can position it where it makes the most sense and give it the font, color, and size that works best, as long as the user doesn't need to enter the actual field. That makes it terrific for printouts because you can align merge fields by their baseline by just continuously typing in the same text object and forget about the nuisance of lining things up or sliding left. Another trick is to reduce the font size of everything but the first of the two left angle brackets. FileMaker will display the entire field value according to the font attributes of that first character. And the only comment I want to add about global fields is to make sure to leave them empty until the file is uploaded to the server. Otherwise, they will perpetually have whatever field value was in it at the moment the file got uploaded. Now, I call this problem layout creep. Some layouts were born in the northwest quadrant many years ago when most displays had a resolution of 640 by 480. Sometimes you can even recognize FileMaker buttons from those older versions. This is surely the ugliest layout ever seen, and the owner of the company that uses this database was probably not allowed as a child to play with crayons. As their office monitors were replaced from time to time with bigger ones, he found room to squeeze in some additional buttons, fields, tab controls, and portals. Of course, the right way to remedy this problem is to rethink the way the layout is used in the first place and rebuild it properly without taking advantage of new features. I meant taking advantage of new features like popovers and card windows to conserve space. But you can't do that if the decision maker is stubborn, unwilling to spend money, and proud of his own do-it-yourself skills in FileMaker. And unfortunately, layouts that look like this tend to give FileMaker a bad reputation. Working in layout mode is the ground zero of design work in FileMaker. Some of us can do an entire presentation about coding. I could do it about design. So let's dig into that with some quick remarks about layouts. There's room in the Manage Layouts list to show the theme for each layout, because if the script trigger can be shown with a tiny icon, surely there's room for a column of theme names. Without it, the only alternative is to take note of the number of layouts used by a theme in the Manage Themes dialog and go through every single layout in layout mode until you've identified, deleted, and maybe changed the theme as desired. My only complaint about the inspector is that in Windows, you're able to access the field name, but on a Mac, the field name can't be copied with your cursor. Did you know that there's an extra inspector that you can move around to suit yourself? Some people don't even know it's there. I seldom use it, but there are times when it's very handy to be able to view more than one panel of the inspector at the same time. I'm so glad to have the new Objects Inspector panel that we got several years ago. It took me a while to master its various features, but Claris really did a great job on this one. It was so painful before when there were objects that needed to be arranged in layers, and now we can group and rename almost everything in that object panel. Sometimes it's a little funky to drag something up or down for position, but you can usually overcome that by using the keyboard shortcuts. And you no longer have to ungroup something to edit one of its members. I seldom need to use the Fields panel to place fields on the layout, but I do like how you can choose the kind of field placement and labeling that you prefer. And as I said before, you can also add new fields without going to Manage Database.
Sorry, I have a question real quick about the previous slide that you were on.
Okay.
Is it possible to drag an object that is not within a group into a group?
Well, if I was on a game show, I would say no. If there was a prize for my answer.
That's been my experience. I'm just curious if that's a limitation or just not how it works. So I guess
when that has to be done, what I've done is I ungroup the group, which also causes its name to get lost if you've named the group. But I make sure that right before I ungroup it, the thing that I want to add is either right below or right above it so that I can then just select that additional item and group again.
Yeah, I usually just copy the object and then ungroup it because it also removes, I think, conditional formatting and conditional visibility too. So
right. Sometimes I'll copy the name before I ungroup it so that I don't forget what it was, or it reminds me to retype it.
Okay, that was my only question. Thanks.
Yeah, I found that when you have something grouped, you can select the object and delete it, and it's no longer in the group without having to ungroup. But
Right. You can delete, but you can't add.
Yep.
Correct.
So one of my most often used custom functions I call DV, which is my abbreviation for developer visible. I use it to place objects on a layout, including fields, portals, popover buttons, anything that should be hidden from view except for those with full access accounts. Again, one of the best things about merge fields is how you can type text on the same baseline. Here's another place where text on a baseline is easy to manage. When I'm making the header of fields or portals, I'll type all the words in one text object and position them with tab stops. That way, they're all on the same exact baseline, and you can see the little blue tab stop arrows in the ruler that's shown here. How to configure them, though, is a little bit counterintuitive. First, you turn on the rulers, and then you select line spacing from the format menu. In line spacing, you have to click the Other button to expose the paragraph dialog, where there is a tabs button in the lower left corner. At that point, you can either set the tab stops by entering the type and position in the dialog, or you can just click into the ruler to specify the position and click again to change the justification as needed. Another way I've used this technique is when I create a virtual list and I choose to present it in a text field with a vertical scroll bar. The column headers can either be manually entered on the layout or generated as part of the virtual list itself, or the global variable can be edited in the data viewer. But whatever way you create those column headers, you can use the tab stops to position them, as well as all the text that's beneath them in the virtual list, where the columns are separated by the ASCII character 9. Unfortunately, in WebDirect, tab stops are ignored, and in WebDirect, you have to make separate column titles. One more thing I'd like to mention about layouts. Every desktop publishing program, and even Apple Keynote that I'm using right now, has a text overset indicator to visually inform you that all the text you've entered won't fit within the field boundaries. When making report layouts, I have to sort the records in descending order by the text length of the field that I'm concerned with, instead of guessing, and then expand the field as needed with the attribute for sliding upward and ignoring any empty space. But that's vulnerable to the subsequent entry of a longer text value, maybe the next day. To a designer, that's just crazy. FileMaker should be able to detect the overflow of text in any field and use a script trigger to adjust the font size recursively with the while function until it fits. If that's not the best idea, well, maybe the Claris engineers can come up with a better one. In Script Workspace, the panel of steps on the right side begins with a group called Favorites. It's not doing what I would expect favorites to do, because you can quickly enter something like Go to Layout by typing GTL or Perform Find by typing PF. When I first heard about favorite steps, I imagined creating a favorite consisting of groups of steps that I commonly use, such as if, else if, end if, with and without, get last message choice. Another favorite that I would make for myself is a group of steps beginning with sort records, then go to first record, then start a loop, and end it with exit loop if, go to record next, and finally end loop. Maybe someday we'll be able to make favorite groups of script steps by just dragging them into that sidebar. I usually begin almost every script with allow user abort and set error capture, because it guarantees that the script will not be interrupted by any of the Claris messages that seldom make sense to users. In my opinion, a script should run from beginning to end with any user interaction controlled by the developer who wrote the script. Of course, that requires testing, and there's no excuse for neglecting to test a script that could fail for even the simplest unexpected reason. Annotating scripts with comments is more than a courtesy to coworkers or to a developer who might inherit your work in the future. I can't tell you how many times I've revisited a script that I wrote even a few weeks ago, and I can't remember what I had in mind back then. Like other lists I've shown you, I wish I could sort my scripts by the modification date. But unlike those other list views, script names can be prefixed with date values. That doesn't automatically sort them by date, but it does allow the filter field to reduce the length of the list to a manageable smaller group, or even just one script, because you can search by a word or you can search by, let's say, the year. It's also a handy way to differentiate between a duplicate copy of a script and its original. You can easily compare the performance of the new one to the original before you substitute every instance where the original is called and replace it with the newer one, or keep them both on hand for as long as necessary. The only vulnerability is if you change a script and update its name, it takes effect everywhere inside FileMaker Pro, but if the script is used by FileMaker Server, the name change will cause Server to fail because the schedule cannot find the original. So you have to update the admin console's scheduled script list too. Because of a limitation in the admin console, I always put the word server in any script that is defined to run on a schedule, and then I slide those script names to the top of the list in Script Workspace to make them easier to find in the admin console without scrolling a very long list of script names. Server doesn't yet have a filter for script names, as I'll show you later on. Some script steps, like perform find, can be executed in a single line. I know some developers prefer to make separate explicit steps for enter find mode, as many set field steps as necessary, and then perform find without any saved find attributes. Also, Script Workspace allows us to insert as many blank lines as necessary for ease of legibility. Why is this a problem? Well, you wouldn't think it could be, but not too long ago, a FileMaker Pro update was causing the application to crash when you were using debugger to run through a script that had more than 300 lines. It was fixed more quickly than most other bugs, but that experience reminds me to try to keep my scripts as concise as possible. I'm not a big fan of scripts that include a number of subscripts because it requires more care in passing local parameters from one script to another and being more aware of context changes when the script runs. Another pitfall that's an easy mistake to make is failing to commit a current record before invoking go to related record or accessing the same record in another window. Because I capture the errors, I wasn't being informed that the same record can't be edited in more than one open window. But I've learned that lesson the hard way. And by the way, we can now capture script line numbers to help in debugging when an error is detected. Another change I'd like to see is the ability to see go to layout name by calculation or go to layout number by calculation without having to drill into that script step to determine exactly how it was defined. What you see here is the way that I'd prefer to see it, not the way that it is right now. Of course, the way some calculations are written, it's easy to know if it's by name or by number just by looking at it. But if the calculation expression is longer, it wouldn't be as easy to know it. A friend suggested to me long ago to always add exit script at the end of every script, even if no script result is being defined. The reason is simple. You can't debug your last script step in a script if the script automatically closes when that step is executed. Any local variables disappear, and whatever was visible in the data viewer will vanish too. So you can't see the finality of the script. But having exit script follow that last script step keeps the debugger open and the data viewer alive until you're really done. I use show custom dialog a lot. I admit that I have little patience for others in the community who feel compelled to teach me how to use the new window method as if I didn't already know it. My complaint is that it takes a lot longer to configure a new card or dialog window to operate as efficiently as show custom dialog does. So unless I need more than 3 message choices, I prefer the efficiency of a dialog that captures responses and stays open until either OK or cancel is chosen. We can now commit all 3 responses. We can specify button text. We can capture data in variables in addition to fields. But the one and only thing we can't do is specify the size and position of the dialog the way we can with a new window. Many users don't know how to grab the lower right corner of the dialog to expand it, And because it always opens to whatever was its most recent size and position, they may miss the entirety of the message, and sometimes they don't even see the buttons. What I said before about text overset could also apply to the text in the dialog. At least in iOS and WebDirect, the dialogues appear dead center, and they're easy to scroll if you need to, and you can expand them because you don't have to expand them. You can just scroll through the entirety of the message. So because Claris has improved Show's custom dialog multiple times in the past, it just seems to me that the same controls that work so well in new Windows could easily be added to the Show custom dialog. After all, that engineering already exists. It's not new. And it's fair to say that in iOS and WebDirect, the behavior of custom dialogues is more elegant than it is in Pro. When working with popovers, it's sometimes necessary to prevent the popover from closing until the user has completed whatever is required of the popover, like a radio button choice or a selection from a date picker. The custom dialogues don't give us those kinds of entry inputs, and that's when I would use popovers. I manage the popovers by using script triggers to set a global variable when the trigger begins, when the popover is entered, and then trigger again if it's been satisfied and it allows it to close. I don't have much to say about value lists. It would be nice to be able to import them, at least the ones with custom values. But if you have a value list that uses values from fields, at least you can use the custom values area to write comments or explain how a value list is used or how the relationship to the field values affects what appears in the list of values. Unless I want to allow the user to edit the value list or type into the field that's defined to use a value list, I prefer pop-up menus to drop-down lists because it prevents typos and it prohibits the entry of improper values, like somebody typing Bermuda in a field that's supposed to be US states. Pop-ups now allow type ahead, like drop-downs. The only oddity is that when you want to show the values from the second field, you've got to select the checkbox in the inspector that's called Override Data Formatting with Value List. It's not exactly an intuitive phrase, and I wonder why they didn't just call it Show Values from Second Field. Navigation and menus is one of my favorite subjects, in part because a lot of people who are new to FileMaker, even some who have used FileMaker for a long time, they think it's a website. We can't blame them because, after all, if it's hosted on-premise instead of somewhere in the cloud, it still delivers to a computer or mobile device, and it can look and feel like a website. Of course, layouts are not web pages that get submitted and refreshed, but navigation is essential to the user's ability to interact with whatever is the source of the information. And a menu is an essential element of navigation, whether it's on a layout or FileMaker's menu bar, or the status area above the layout area. I am a big fan of the feature that lets us insert an image into the body part of a layout. And I always try to use that for the first layout that appears when the database opens. Instead of the traditional but arbitrary layout with a lot of fields and buttons, or even one that uses the role of the logged-in user to navigate to something relevant to their department or job, I prefer something photographic or artistic that makes the users feel at home in a system that reflects their company's personality the way a website does. The Claris interface for making custom menus could be more intuitive than it is now. Matter of fact, it doesn't help that Claris is inconsistent about the distinction between custom menus and custom menu sets. There's a comment field that helps explain what the menu or menu item is for. Of course, I understand that the custom menus feature involves some very complex adjustments to what is the basic infrastructure of the application. And although there are times when I find it necessary to make a custom menu with modified menu items, it takes me way too long and I find it to be error prone. Maybe that's just me, but for example, changing the way the delete record command fires a script instead of just deleting a record can leave you with a 0 records found condition unless you plan ahead for that circumstance. Another example is creating a new record or a new related record. With the hide attribute, I can make a button appear in the last portal row, and it causes a new window to open, but where the user cannot see it. I make it appear somewhere way off screen, like 25,000 points to the right. In the new window dialog, I make that new window appear at 0 when a full access user can see it, to ensure that if any kind of error might occur, the user will be able to see it. And it can then be trapped and fixed before launching that script for other users. In that off-screen new window, 0 records found is not visible after a record is deleted from a found set of 1, because the error is captured and the script closes the off-screen window after the record is deleted. Because the script ends on the view where you began, you have to decide where to go next to compensate for 0 records. On the other hand, if you're developing in full access, you'll see the window at the 0 point to determine if the error is a false positive or not. Here are several custom functions. These are my favorites that I like to include in any file I work on. And these are all independent of actual field names, so they can be imported from one file into another. I mentioned the DV a little while earlier. I just type the letters DV into the hide attribute after selecting one or more objects. Literal date will express any date value in words. So I often use this in email messages, reports, and things other than layouts. The abbreviations CH and CW are just my way of abbreviating centered vertically or centered horizontally. And I use them for placing windows or even other objects dead center. Card windows are an exception because they appear centered automatically if you don't specify a different location. Device layout can be used in conjunction with layout names so that it's easy to navigate to the right place once you detect at login what kind of device and system platform the user is on. While writing the script, you don't have to consider the platform if your layouts are named consistently and properly. Currency format, similar to literal date, I use this in email messages to format numbers without a concern about the correct number of decimals, whether or not pennies are included in the number. Dollar format is nearly identical to currency format. It just inserts a dollar sign. Comma number, this one is just about inserting commas into raw numbers, similar to the thousands separator in the inspector. The inspector, of course, is useless when you're working in the calculation of an email message body. Phone formats. I have 3 pre-configured phone formats that can be applied with a script trigger to any field with a 10-digit number. On the settings or control panel layout, the client can select their preferred style. And the hidden benefit is that it prevents typos by obviating all punctuation when entering telephone numbers. You just have to enter the 10 numbers. And finally, SQL date is a simple way to convert the expression of a date returned by SQL into the FileMaker date format with slashes that separate the month, day, and year. I'm not sure if this is documented anywhere. I just recall that it took me some time to figure out why the list of fonts that appears when you use the selector in the formatting bar has some horizontal lines that divide it into 3 sections. Those divider lines also appear when you select fonts from the format menu, but either way, they're more faint than what I'm showing you, and it's easy to overlook them. The first group is a list of fonts that are present anywhere in your database. The second group narrows that list down to the fonts that exist on the current layout. And everything below the second horizontal divider line is a list of all fonts active in the operating system. Fonts matter because any user doesn't necessarily have the same fonts you use in development. So there's no way to predict what font will replace the one you specify if the user doesn't have it. You should also know that Adobe has recently deprecated the use of its Type 1, also called PostScript fonts, and if it hasn't already affected someone's operating system, it probably will in the near future. The Styles panel in the inspector is not much help when it comes to fonts, and changing the font for an object that's been defined with a style will cause the style on that layout to indicate that it's been changed. The same is true if you change the font size or color. If you then save that change style and also update the layout's theme, you'll be changing that font on every layout in the database using that theme. For that reason, I try to insert the name of the font and its weight or font style into the name of the FileMaker style. If I had my way, the style in the styles panel would be shown using the style of the object it's assigned to, the same way that some programs do in their list of fonts, so people will be able to preview whatever they choose. I saw a suggestion in the community not long ago that makes a lot of sense. We talked about this a moment ago. It was a discussion about Apex Blue, and the proposed idea was for Claris to give us new themes with fonts already applied to objects. I would add that these could be themes that restrict the fonts to only those that work in iOS or WebDirect or cross-platform Mac and Win databases. I hope it gets enough upvotes before I retire, so I might actually be able to use those new themes. In my experience, the font that has the best cross-platform metrics is Tahoma, which is in every Mac OS as well as the Windows system of any computer where Microsoft Office or Office 365 is installed. Remember the original Macintosh? One of its advertised features was that it came with 9 fonts, all named for cities: Chicago, Geneva, New York, Monaco, San Francisco, Los Angeles, Toronto, Cairo, and Venice. Black text on a white screen was also a radical new feature back in 1984. Nick Orr of Goya in Australia published a list of cross-platform fonts back in 2006. He told me last week he hasn't updated this list, and it may be that's why it doesn't include Tahoma. I made my own list of cross-platform fonts 4 years ago. By cross-platform, I don't mean that the font metrics are identical. I just mean that you can rely on these fonts being available in both Mac and Windows operating systems. This list also doesn't include Tahoma. I don't know why. Maybe I just need to update it. My list of iOS fonts was made a few years ago. It may have changed since then. The ones in yellow are the ones that are also found in the Mac OS, and that too may have changed. Did you know there was a documentary called Helvetica made in 2007 on the 50th anniversary of its creation? I may be the only font geek in the FileMaker community, but this is a very informative and entertaining history of the way this font and a number of other fonts and their designers have impacted our culture, our public signage, and the work we do on our computers. If you ever see an object on a layout with a line style called engraved or embossed, you know it came from the classic theme, which was once upon a time the only theme. All the tech support advice I've ever heard or read is to remove classic from the database to fix existing problems and prevent new ones. Other than changing the theme from classic to something else, and then deleting classic, I don't know how else to remove it completely. Using managed themes, you can see all the themes in any database, even if they're assigned to no layouts. Thankfully, you can import themes from other files. If you have Apex Blue assigned to any layouts, you can then go about the same method of finding them to change to a different theme. I say that because Apex Blue sucks. I detest the pale blue color and the way anytime you add a table, at least since version 19, it automatically adds the new layout with the Apex Blue theme to the system. Changing or renaming Apex Blue doesn't override that behavior. And as I said before, finding layouts that use Apex Blue takes way too much time in a database with more than a few dozen layouts. Minimalist is a big improvement over Classic, especially for layouts that will be printed or only used by FileMaker to run scripts in alternate windows, because there's one style included in that theme, and it's called default. FileMaker also has window styles, and there are now 4 of them. Document is the ordinary window style that existed before the other 3. Floating document windows are similar, except that this kind of window is always on top of other windows, even when inactive. And the toolbar is optional. It's useful if you want to position it beside the other window that the user is working on, maybe for reference information like the legend of a map or employee telephone numbers. Dialog windows used to be called modal windows. They can't be minimized, and the user has to complete whatever they're doing in a dialog window before they can dismiss it to access other FileMaker things. The toolbars are optional here too. And card windows are my favorite kind of alternate window because you can specify various behaviors like dimming. I've gone ahead a little bit. Just a second. There we go. Now, in the Styles tab of the inspector, you'll find a list of styles for each object type. Clicking the Show All checkbox will show you every style that comes with that theme, even if you can't select the styles with a different name. Personally, I have a problem being able to see the red color of changed ones, whether I'm in dark or light mode. I don't know why it's called red-green color blindness, because it doesn't affect my ability to see green. I only have the difficulty of differentiating colors like red, maroon, or navy blue from black. My biggest issue with styles is I haven't found the naming convention comprehensive enough to describe all the attributes of the object and still fit within the width of the inspector. 10 years ago, there was a presentation at DevCon by Bob Shockey of Alchemy Group for a solution that he called Stylo. I thought it was brilliantly conceived for FileMaker 13, which was then the current version. I was reminded of it today for the presentation, but I confess in 2014, I couldn't figure out how to deploy it successfully. I called Bob today and told him I think it would be great if it was made into an add-on that you could use in any FileMaker database. What I'm showing you here about themes and styles is that there's this bullet character beside all of these styles, and nobody seems to know what it's for. So if any of you know, I'd sure like to learn. I put the word out a few days ago trying to find an answer to it. The other day, I took this online test of color blindness, so at least it confirmed that I can't see red. And that's a problem when I want to see which theme or style has changed with that tiny little button that's red. What I try to do is come up with my own naming convention for themes and styles. I shouldn't say themes, I mean styles, and try to include the name of the font and whether it's left or right, top or bottom. Stylo is the presentation that Bob made back in the DevCon in San Antonio. I think it was brilliantly conceived, but I couldn't figure it out, and he kind of abandoned it. And then another thing that I like to always do is vertically center the text that I have in fields. When who was it? It was Matt Petrowski who was once doing a presentation, and he said, "This is something I always do." It made me feel like, okay, I would do the same thing if I could. Here I'm showing you how to make a circular button. You simply make the corner radius half of whatever is the width and height. And you can make sure that the padding is either 0 or very small. Some layout objects like portals tend to look better if the bottom corners are nicely rounded. I like to use the same approach for the top corners of headers that I create for portals. Sometimes a header like this is better for a field than an ordinary text label alongside it. Maybe you've already read about Steve Jobs' design preference for rounded corners on all of Apple's products and how it was a big challenge for early Macintosh engineers to draw dialog boxes with rounded corners on screens that had a 72 pixel per inch resolution. Anyway, it's subtle, but effective and well worth the time it takes to tweak it. Finally, a word about conditional formatting. I don't know why we can't format the color of lines the same way we can with text and fills. Line thicknesses, too, would be a welcome addition to conditional formatting. About 2 years ago, I presented a number of ideas for the admin consoles in a share voice session. In the latest version of Server, some have resulted in the new and improved lists of schedules and backups. I'd really like to see home URL parameters for WebDirect added the way it's shown here. One reason this is important is because you need desktop access to the server to edit the XML file. And building this into the admin console would overcome that security challenge for companies that restrict access to the server's user login. Another improvement I'd like to see is a filter on the list of database scripts, so you wouldn't have to move through those scripts to the top of the workspace list and just be able to add them by selecting them without endless scrolling. And finally, I'd like the settings file that is saved to include more than just the schedules and groups, because it would save a lot of time when uninstall, reinstall is necessary, and you don't have all those settings memorized. For example, when the same encryption key is used for more than one database, it would be helpful to select all the databases that use that same key and enter it just once. My first wish list item is something I submitted to Claris only recently. It's about page breaks for printing. Remember at the beginning, I discussed MicroPro InfoStar. I mentioned features that I wish we had in FileMaker. Well, making a page break is one of them. In ReportStar, you could type a period in the left margin, which was a non-printing area, for a dot command to give instructions to the printers, such as page break when the line number is 42. What I'm showing you here is the layout for an application form that a railroad offers customers in WebDirect. You can see in layout mode that there are a lot of hide attributes used because certain fields are shown conditionally. So for example, if the application is for overhead wires, all the pipeline fields are hidden and vice versa. Or if yes is selected in the upper right corner for casing pipe, then all the fields in the column beneath it immediately appear. Placeholder text is used to hide the field labels unless the field is not null. Conditional formatting is used to indicate items that are not required, that are required on the application form. But because browse mode is the only way to view in WebDirect on the application form, there's some extra scrolling required in the web browser to skip the areas that are hidden. Now, this is the layout used for printing. The print to PDF function is performed on FileMaker server, and that PDF is inserted into a container field with the base elements plugin after it sends the PDF to the WebDirect user as an email attachment. Placeholder text and conditional formatting are used just like on the data entry layout, and any hyperlinks become live when the PDF output is made. You can see how almost everything on the page uses the sliding up attribute. It works as expected, but the problem that can't be solved in FileMaker is that there's no way to predict where the page breaks will occur, because objects that become visible and slide up depend on the choices the user has made when completing the fields on the entry form. So here's my idea for how to create page breaks in FileMaker. You would drag a guide to the precise place where the page break should occur, and then right-click the guide to convert it to a page break. There's no reason why you could not specify as many page breaks as needed to ensure that the output result is what you expect it to be. Of course, it's simple for me to describe it, but probably not so easy for someone else to engineer it. Where am I? This was about naming styles, which I've really talked about already. So I'm just going to skip ahead there. There we go. I'm sure that everybody knows that Rick Kalman has been responsible for gathering the thousands of product ideas people have submitted for many years. And I don't doubt that it's an enormous challenge to organize them, prioritize them, and keep up to date with all the incoming suggestions. As someone who's willing to contribute ideas or report bugs, I find it difficult to know whether I'm the first one to propose something new or if my idea or bug report is just adding to an existing list. I suspect it would make Rick's job easier if there weren't as many redundant items, but it would help to know if mine is the only such report or if I could learn something from other previous suggestions. The upvotes in the new backlog page are a step in the right direction, but the problem with that page is that you can only upvote something that's already been published. It just seems to me that a searchable database, like FileMaker, would be a handy way to archive and organize the many thousands of suggestions, refer to the dates, add comments or upvotes, and even withdraw something that you submitted long ago if it's no longer relevant. You'd think it could be done in FileMaker. I wonder why not. My last wish list item for today is about the data viewer. You know how frustrating it can be if you've forgotten to turn off automatically evaluate, and the only options are to wait a very long time or force quit the application. I'd like to be able to tell the data viewer, I'm sorry I asked, please go away, the same way I can dismiss Siri if I've changed my mind. I made a quick list of plugins and tools, and in consideration of the time, I'm just going to run them very quickly. Developer Assistant is priceless. I just couldn't do my work without it. It lets me search the graph for table occurrences or scripts for particular words I can find and replace. For color, I have 3 chosen methods: the FileMaker color tools. I also rely on the Adobe color wheel and this color mixer that's in the W3 Schools website. The Base Elements plugin is terrific. It's free. It's worth the price to pay the annual fee for support for all the things that it does. I use CNS plugins for their SMTP at email when I need to format email as HTML or add more attachments, even though you can do that now in FileMaker. Monkey Bread, very powerful plugin, more in it than you can imagine. I use it not that extensively, but when I need something, I can usually find it there. I use Postman, of course, when I'm working with APIs, which is relatively new for me. And similarly, JavaScript. I don't know if I'll ever become proficient, but I took Jeremy Brown's course last year, and it was really excellent, and his customer service was terrific. I found this list of reserved SQL words, and I can refer to this list, which has 259 words in the list, and be sure not to name any of your fields with any of these reserved words, because that will explain sometimes you see a question mark when you're in the data viewer. Brian Dunning's list of custom functions online is valuable. I couldn't live without Text Expander because I can abbreviate all sorts of things, whether they're for FileMaker or not. And for entering things like SQL calculations or some of the script steps, I know one that I use very often is spelled PCAVS, and what it does is it does a pattern count of the application version. So I don't have to type that whole thing to determine whether server is running or not. NMI is a wonderful credit card gateway that I've used for 20 years. They allow me to post transactions with insert from URLs, so I don't have to use any plugins or work with any APIs. Next day funding is true for everything except American Express, and you can now do e-checks for ACH bank transactions. We talked about live code a little bit already. I love Richard Carlton's live stream educational series. And Paradise Partners has a wonderful add-on calendar that I've used time and again. And then everybody needs a DDR tool, and there are 3 in the community that are all different from one another, but you've got to have at least one of them, I think. On Wikipedia, I found this list of low-code competitors to FileMaker in order to put a presentation together for the Dallas group about 6 months ago. And in addition to Wikipedia, there are a number of others that I was able to locate. Personally, I don't find any value in any of these new low-code options because they can't compete with the FileMaker toolbox. And I don't want to start a project which is going to run into a dead end somewhere because it lacks the ability to do something that FileMaker can do. So with that, I've come to the end of my slide presentation, and I'm happy to do any discussion with anybody who's still with us.
Yeah, I posted to the chat to remind me, is there a way that we can get those slides? So like you've got some stuff that's pretty complex and trying to follow along with the video after it's posted would be kind of hard, some of the
Yeah,
details
sure.
and the coding. So if we
I
can get
can
these
I
posted,
can
that'd be
zip up
great.
the Keynote file for you if you want,
Oh, that'd be great.
because it's big. But I found that over the years, it's so much better to present with something that's pre-written and scripted rather than fumble through something.
Right. And the other thing is, for those people who don't have Keynote, I tend to also create a PDF of the slides and have that available for people that just want to view what's there.
I
Don't
can
have
do
Keynote.
both.
Okay,
I can
that'd
do
be
both, I
great.
suppose.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
Dennis, I would love a copy as well. This is Vince.
Sure.
Also
Where are
want
you
to
now,
thank
Vince?
you. Right now, I'm in California, but I live in Florida these days.
What happened to Italy?
Or Germany even.
Oh, was it
Well,
Germany?
Well, we lived in Germany for 2 years, and then we decided to move back to the U.S. and Oakland was a disaster. So my wife lived in the South, and she said she doesn't like cold weather, so I give it a try. So yeah, there I am.
Reason I asked is because I'm gonna need to make some European friends. I got my Austrian passport a few months back, and was considering relocating.
Oh yeah, happy to. I mean, I can put you in touch with friends I have in Switzerland and in Italy.
Matt
and
Navarre in Greece.
and Matt Navarre in Greece, and
All right,
we have
well,
lots
that's
of
good to know.
contacts. Yeah.
I don't want to have to learn how to write in FileMaker in a foreign tongue at this stage in my career.
Yeah.
But if Matt has advice, I'd be happy to listen to him because I love Athens.
Yeah.
Well, he keeps training
Matt is a
everybody
great
over
resource.
here. Yeah. I think still all this over here.
I find your talk really fascinating just because, like you said at the very beginning, we all don't come from or very rarely do we come from a computer science background. If there are some people I work with that have a computer science degree, but it's not where they kind of landed in FileMaker. It's so fascinating, and your journey is so intertwined and so it's like what is it, Forrest Gump journey of FileMaker. It's so cool. Thank you for sharing.
It's funny that you say that because I thought long and hard about if I start telling that story, where do I end? I left out a few things that my sister said to me, don't tell them that. They're not going to be interested in why you went to the Supreme Court. So
now, wait a second. How is your sister involved in all this story now? Does she do FileMaker or?
No, my sister is just a good coach. So I ran her through the personal part, the first 20 minutes of this thing a few days ago so that she could tell me what I'm, she'll never hesitate to tell me that I'm wrong.
Yeah. So at least that part, Dennis, I really want to thank you for such an incredible journey that you shared with us. It's very interesting.
Thank you. I'm glad. I would love to, hear the same sort of thing from others. So maybe when you get to be our age, Vince, that's what's interesting.
I've been thinking about it. I'm not too far off from your age, but I've been definitely thinking about telling my journey and how I landed where I landed as well. But anyway, thank you.
I appreciate it. You're saying so.
Lots of good ideas as well for improvements. I'm just really excited to see that Claris is sometimes moving very quickly on suggestions, and so that's very cool that that they take that to heart and then make those changes.
So
hopefully
they closed they closed the idea section lately, right? You can't actually add anything new.
That's right.
Yeah,
They
Yeah,
did.
it got spammed, and they had to take out the ability to actually add a new idea. But you can still vote on what's there.
Yeah.
If you have an idea that you want to get kind of promoted, go ahead and post to the community and say, hey, the idea section's closed, but here's my idea. And, hopefully they'll route it where it needs to be so that new ideas get put back in there.
Well, it'd be nice if they at least put it back on the idea section so the rest of us could see it, though.
Yeah, I can
that's what
understand
I'm
why
saying.
it makes sense that they wanted to close it down so that they could channel everything new into something new, but that doesn't exist yet.
They're working on getting it fixed to be able to prevent the spam. It was pretty horrible.
How was it was it spammed in the sense that people were just getting hyper
People were
negative?
posting, and it was being posted in a way that they weren't signed in, and it was like it was a bot that was doing it.
Is it different than the regular community?
It was pretty horrible.
Right. To Steve's point, I mean, to Stephen's point, how was that different than just posting to community?
Because there's different controls on community.
Okay. Well, I know that it's not to Beverly. What you said is there's nothing to stop someone from going to community, posting a discussion topic, saying, here's what I think would be a good idea. I look at every subject line of every single post, so I'm sure that there's a number of people at FileMaker who do the same, plus other developers, and also workarounds. I would say workarounds. Dennis, I think you hit a huge percentage of the topics that we address, and the dialogue one is a very popular dialogues, card windows, popovers. I like it when there's workarounds. I too am in the camp wishing that the show custom dialogue was more robust, because I know there's other ways to do it, but that's a one-liner,
That's the idea. It's such a quick and easy way.
Yeah, and if it would, I'd love to be able to, position it and this and that, but whatever.
Yeah. So on your wish list, were those ideas you had actually already submitted in?
I think at one time or another, anything that I call the wish list is something that I've either raised my hand about at a DevCon meeting or written to Rick Kalman about it. He acted on one many years ago when I pointed out that in FileMaker Go you couldn't append to a PDF, and for some reason that hit a nerve, and he immediately put that into the next version that came out.
I wish I could get the ODBC password with a calculation dialog box, and I've got like 60 or 70 script steps that have to do ODBC imports from different tables, and we have to change that every 6 months. So
you have to put that script. You have to change that in every single script step.
Yeah, there's no way to store the ODBC password and just refer to it. You have to, each import record script step has its own password.
Well, I know you're recording, so I'm going to take a chance and throw another radical idea at all of you while you're still awake. Sometimes I've wondered, why does Apple keep FileMaker? Or Claris, I should say. Why do they keep it? Seems to me that one of the Apple stores, like Chicago or San Francisco, probably generates more volume in a year than all of what Claris does. So is it only that they use FileMaker internally and that's why they keep it around?
I think there's a pact. There's an internal pact that Claris kept them alive a long time ago when Apple was going broke. And so it's kind of like a religious thing. They can't just get rid of the company that kept them alive. So I don't know. That's my theory.
I think the entire Apple ecosystem would collapse if FileMaker went away. It would be like the wolves in Yellowstone Park, because you start with like Apple as a cross-platform, you lose the entire cross-platform market, you lose the graphical design. It would be disastrous.
Well, it's
I'm
just
being a little
weird that
hyperbolic.
Here's
it's
the
weird that it's
radical
a
question.
subsidiary, but it's not.
I said this to Richard Carlton
Yeah.
last year at Engage when we were having dinner. I said, if you could buy stock and buy the company from Apple, would you invest in it?
Yeah.
It's honestly, I think it really does have huge synergist, hyperbole aside. I do think that FileMaker has huge synergies. Vince's point is, I remember a time when people had Apple computers because FileMaker gave them a cross-platform. So you'd have organizations that had Mac and Windows, and the Macintosh computers would stay. And I think whilst that might be more true back in the day, I think it's still true. If you look at the associated sales of mobile devices. So I think that FileMaker as a platform has ecosystemic implications, as well as the rumor has it, I'm not under NDA. It's a massively used internal to FileMaker.
Do you think that those users back in the day were the big corporations like United Airlines that I understood, or the Defense Department that was using it?
I can't speak for big departments. I mean, I have one Fortune 1, I don't have a 500. I have a Fortune 1000 customer, and it's cross-platform.
Right.
It maintained, without FileMaker, Access wasn't cross-platform. And back then, cross-platform meant Mac Windows. FileMaker was. Hence, you keep the Mac computers. Hence, you keep the graphical design market. Obviously, it's not the big revenue source. But then again, ecosystemic is a valid principle. And wolves in, the story of the wolves in Yellowstone, and how when they put wolves back, bad news for the some animals, but the rivers changed courses. If you haven't seen that, that's fascinating. I'll find a link for that. Anyway,
I remember at one of the DEF CONs when they introduced or announced the elimination of the Windows application frame. It got a standing ovation.
Yeah.
Yes, I remember that. I
Yeah.
hated the old version of all the little windows popping down to the bottom.
Right.
the SDI MDI or MDI SDI trans.
Yep. But I think you remember too that most of FileMaker Claris's revenue is not US based, it's international.
Yeah, how's that broken down? I mean, I know Japan's a huge percentage, and US is, what do we think? 30%, something like that? They don't tell me.
Closer to the numbers from what I heard years ago. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember when we used to do training at the Wedge. It was for FileMaker train the trainer training that they did over there. Japan was like a third of the class. And they had to travel.
And it's big in Australia and New Zealand too. Right, David Head?
Yeah, it's big here. It's big enough. That I don't think we get as much attention as we should get for how big it is. But yeah, they had some interesting discussions with Ryan McCann when he was down for the for Reconnect conference, and we've got some exciting things to discuss with him to try and get programs up and running here before Reconnect next year. So hopefully there'll be some things going on. We consider this region to be a great region to experiment with things. So if they want to experiment with various licensing or being able to onboard new customers or things like that.
Or like freemium?
A great little environment to be able to experiment in.
Pay by the month instead of by the year.
Well, you never know. The thing was that Asia Pacific was actually the very first region in the world to do annual volume licensing. They experimented with it down here, and when it worked, they went worldwide with it.
Well, I would, what Dennis last slide up, the breadth and depth of the FileMaker platform, especially with some of the new stuff, its capacity, in my opinion, its capacity exceeds what I see out in the wild. So I think there's room for taking over more markets, just by the skillful use of people on this call.
I say to anyone who will listen that I firmly believe that FileMaker is the best software in the world that no one knows about.
Yeah.
True.
And I always say that what got me really thoroughly hooked, because I also do SQL and web development and like that. But to me, when I use FileMaker and work with clients, I found that FileMaker was able to communicate with 2 or 3 different things that could not communicate with each other. So it made a great middleware of bringing things in, manipulating it, and sending it back out somewhere else in an easy way with an easy interface, and so it's like invaluable for me in my toolbox to have that with everything else.
I finding that it's becoming more and more the business operating system. You can't.
Going back to
critical.
when I worked in the promotional products field, long ago, nobody knew what promotional products were. It's not like today where you see them on television all the time. And the trade association built relationships with college marketing professors. They called them VIPs, very important professors. And the idea was that they would be able to teach their students about a form of advertising that wasn't typically in the curriculum. And some of those students, became more educated as buyers of the product when they went into careers of their own. And some of them went into, selling the product or working for a manufacturer. So I was trying to suggest to Claris years ago that the professors who use FileMaker in the classroom could also be teaching it. Somebody's teaching them Excel and Microsoft Word, and at an early age too. I remember going to my son's 7th grade back to school night when the teachers were all presenting with PowerPoint. And I complimented the teacher on how much I learned from her little 3-minute talk before we had to move from one classroom to another. And she said, well, your son doesn't live with you, so you don't realize that we have homework assignments for them and they're supposed to present to the class using PowerPoint. And I thought that was terrific because it made them graduate from high school with the presentation skills to talk to other people in business. And I sometimes wonder when I'm talking to a millennial about, did they ever learn? But FileMaker could be taught at the college level.
Oh, yeah. Actually, at a university, there were a few departments like library science and other ones that were they're trying to introduce concepts, like data management and programs. I mean, because it's all built into FileMaker in one thing, right? You don't have to go get this and get that. You can actually just, it's all a self-contained application that has something that you'd have to get multiple parts to get to work elsewhere. And so it was a great platform for, I think, management information science used to use it a little bit. Library science would use it. So there were opportunities there to, if they could just get it into the hands of students and their professors to use for free for 6 months at least, right? Or for the semester, that they could have, they probably could have increased a little bit of market share, because these people are supposed to go out and be influencers later on, right? Whatever you learn with, you're likely to just keep on using because you've gotten used to it. Just like I kept my textbooks, right?
Yeah, I thought Nick Likebody over in London or in England did something like that with one school that he was working with years ago, where he was actually trying to get free copies of FileMaker so that they could train these kids that are going into this vocational, mock business kind of thing and actually building something. And it's like you get them involved now when they get into the workforce, when they need to solve problems, they're just going to go back to what they know, which is FileMaker.
Right. And it was too easy, and anything else is going to be hard by comparison.
Sure.
You've got them hooked at that point, right? That's what happened to me, right? I was doing a bunch of, what was I programming in Perl and C and all these other things, and it just took too long to get a finished product. Working in in-house programmer. And then I started playing around with FileMaker, and it's like, wow, I just got the whole thing. Something that would have taken me months of programming, I have it this week, right? And you get that stuff's addicting once you get into it, but you have to get somebody into it while they're still learning.
That's why we as consumers of software are called users, just like illicit drugs. They're users.
Yeah. So if you don't teach people, if people don't get caught on things like that, then this is what I deal with now, is that you have, because there aren't the resources in some places to hire programmers to do a lot of coding and things like that. And so they'll go, well, I'll just go out and buy this cloud SaaS system out there, but they've got like a dozen different SaaS systems that they have to be trained in and know how to use and administer, and they don't really integrate unless you still end up having to do some programming. But all these systems they're buying are disjointed, and they could have had everything in one ecosystem if the IT managers were aware of what FileMaker is capable of.
Or they had forethought.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. I'm going to have to leave, but I just wanted to thank you, Dennis, again for your presentation tonight.
Well, thank you. I'm impressed that everybody stuck around, and wish you all a good weekend. And I promise I'll post these slides in the PDF into that chat link I see for the community.
Oh, good.
Thanks again, Dennis. Bye.
That'd be great.
To get more people interested in FileMaker, what we need is a very simple app that is easy to download, does something very practical that anybody and everybody, especially millennials, would want to have on their phone and everywhere else, and it's absolutely free.
That's right. Yeah, because if you had an app out there, like a killer app that you built in FileMaker, and you give it to somebody, this is what you do. Like, I can kind of do that with FileMaker Go, right? If I email it to somebody and they open it up in their phone, it automatically asks for FileMaker on the FileMaker app, on the App Store.
Right.
It's like, well, you could do that if you had the freemium version on PC and Mac. All of a sudden, you had this killer app. People want the application, and they start using it for their own personal use. And once they get serious and want to do something big with it, of course, they got to buy it, right? And that was what we were promised with. I'm getting old waiting for that freemium version now that they promised years ago. But it seemed to be the solution for everything we were talking about with education and with, growing the platform too.
That's what's needed.
There's a lot of things that people are interested in having and doing, but aren't willing to pay for, right? Because it's just, they're not making any money off of it, like their recipes or who knows what they want to do. But people get hooked once they start doing some of this stuff just for fun. Now they've got a skill set that they can actually build something that's useful to a company or their work or something else.
That's where Claris is gun shy about giving the cow away,
Yeah.
They don't know how to disable it enough where it's compelling to upgrade, but not, hamper their existing business and their unit sales and all that stuff.
But two separate products or two separate versions of it. There's the freemium, whatever it is. It's not a full version. All it is, it's just an app. But and all you do is use it. But it's built on FileMaker. And then there's a link for a free 30-day trial to FileMaker. But you don't have to do that. But
see, that was the problem with the freemium version that they rolled out originally. It was a separate extension which required a conversion of some sort, and it wasn't backwards compatible. So if you hook somebody on that and you wanted to buy the full thing, there's no path back to FileMaker.
What was that? What application was that?
That was Claris Pro, version 20.
Oh.
No, I want a killer app that every kid wants to download and have on his phone.
So would you have to somehow poll a representative number of young people and find out what it is that they need that isn't already satisfied by social media?
A dozen of them out there, and let them choose for themselves. Let them get what's trending. Get it out there. And then put the FileMaker name on it. That's all. Build it. And they will come.
Yeah, I would say some good sample files. I've actually, at the last meeting, we were talking about sample files. So here's my idea, and it's very similar to what VON MBA 13.
Vaughn.
Okay, thank you. That was a lot easier to say. Was saying it's the sample files, and I see people who've been around for a long time. The sample files, I'd like to see them, come back. I don't know what's out there, but I haven't seen things that are showcase the platform. That's what I'm trying to say. So a really awesome contact file, a very awesome image management file, or a good taxonomy file for tagging. A good inventory is complicated, but something that gets people started, especially that gives you a foothold in the small to mid-sized market, which I think is the sweet spot still for FileMaker, which is, groups of 5 to 10 to 20 to 50 to 100, let's say, so that they get a leg up. I think that went away. I might have missed it. Something that really kind of showcases the platform, uses the features. Dennis put up a slide of I think it was 100 features. The last I saw sample files, they use a fraction, and with all due respect, some of them they don't use particularly well. Anyway, bring back sample files and make them awesome. That's my 2 cents.
When you say sample files, are you thinking about the starter solutions?
Yes, I've looked at the starter solutions over the years, and some of them. Let's just say that some of them are better than others.
I'm saying something completely different. Ladies and gentlemen, look at us. Look at the average age of us. Where are the people that are going to be here 10, 20, 30 years from now? How are we going to get them hooked on FileMaker? Give them an app. It's built in FileMaker. It's everything else, but it does something they want to do. It's great. And they will spread the news. Somewhere in there's a FileMaker name, FileMaker logo. They will spread the news. They will find the FileMaker store. They will find a way to get a free copy, a test copy. And some of them, maybe 1%, maybe 1/10 of 1%, will get on board. But we got to bring it. I know that like Benson Burnham, they were trying to do some stuff with this with some of the local colleges and stuff like that. And I know that Eric is at the university. Get them hooked, but don't make it. It doesn't require them to have FileMaker per se or a license or anything. We just want to get them to have something that they use, and it's really great. It's a killer app. Where did it come from?
Yeah, Vaughn, I've onboarded some people over the years, and I'm up there on the age scale. My thing is, if you give everybody dreams about the 20-year-old. I've brought some young people into the platform. The only way that I've been able to do it is by having projects for them to work on. And they're usually projects in order to kind of, produce a revenue flow to finance the onboarding of a developer. of a young age, which is sort of, you hear all this talk about young age. It's overrated, by the way, is to have projects for them to work on. So anyway, that's my 2 cents.
Only thing they learn is that this app that they're using is cross-platform. They can do it on their phone. They could use it on Android. They could use it on Apple. If that's the only thing they learn, and then they realize, oh, this is FileMaker. FileMaker can do this kind of stuff. FileMaker is cross-platform. I'm not trying to turn them into business executives right off the bat. I'm trying to get them interested in the program, in FileMaker. And from there, those and then they're really interested, it will grow and they will get into it. But they need to have something. They're not going to take the time to sit down and learn everything. They're a short extension span, a killer app, and it will take off and it will be trending and it'll sell itself.
It would be wonderful if somebody like Tim Cook, when he does those keynote presentations and he brings Microsoft up on the stage to talk about their latest thing, there was something in FileMaker that could be introduced to the world with an audience like that.